yeah, so then if we look, so I'll show you. There's this site here, 5E Tools. I think I've mentioned it before.
Mhm.
But if I was to start an encounter, like usually here's where I'd start from. I also have imported like plenty of homebrew and third-party materials and stuff, so it's got tons of things to choose from. I freaking love this website so much. I don't know what I would do if something happened to it. But let's just say I was going to start an encounter with some basic undead here. I can sort by CR. All right, so let's just say hypothetically we're in the Shadowfell. I want to put a shadow skeleton here. It brings up all its stats here. I can see all the conditions and everything. I can see its hit dice, roll for all its stuff here as well. Side here. But yeah, and you can add here. So I can go here and add shadow skeletons. I can go here, add skeleton knight, and I can go add bloated. And then I can go to send to DM screen. I can take these guys, I can put them all around here. So then while I'm running the session, I can have multiple stat blocks at the same time and it not be so.
Yeah, that's so nice.
So definitely something that it makes it a lot easier. Okay, these guys roll their attacks. This one's gonna roll their attacks.
Yeah.
Damage. Yeah. Because as much as I try to roll most things in public, but there's just for the sake of like efficiency where it's like, okay, I've just gotta get through all of these 15 different actions before the next turn. And then the more you understand like your monsters and like what their purpose is and what they're there for, the easier it also makes like running the actual combat, because then you can kind of say, okay, I've got these bloated zombies here that they've got death bursts on them here, so it's pretty clear that you want them close in the midst of everything there. They're meant to get exploded. While these shadow skeletons over here, they've got their scimitar attacks, but they've also got their finger darts, which have the potential to cause them to take extra damage. So this sounds like the type of creature then that's going to be a little bit more on the outskirts until it lands that hit, and then go in for the kill with the scimitars. So
gotcha. Okay.
That once you kind of understand that about those creatures, then you that kind of informs your positioning of them. That informs what they're going to be doing each turn. So then you're not really thinking like, I don't really have to spend, at least unless it's like the more complicated creatures like people, like Yanni or something. So, unless it's something like that, then I don't really have to spend too much time thinking, because I know that turn to turn, here's what they want to do. Here's how they're going to try to accomplish.
I know you mentioned, and this might be something for the next part too, but I know you mentioned that you had some math that you like to do in terms of calculating roughly what you think where it should land.
What do you mean, like in an encounter?
Yeah, like there was, I don't know if
like
that was actually
deadliness.
Yeah, in terms of like how you're like, all right, this with all the hit points and stuff, this is kind of roughly where it should be.
So that's largely, I think, because of my brain and how many sessions I've like run up until this point, and also because this is really when it gets to like the whole designer aspect, right? Like looking
Mhm.
through the DMG. This is why a lot of people will complain about it. It doesn't give great information there. Welcome. Um, the information is not very clear there, but the DMG has a lot of information about like the monster creation, creating a monster. So this whole chapter here, if you haven't read it before, chapter creating a monster in the chapter 9 of the DMG. Like it says, it includes plenty of monster, but not every monster you can imagine. So when you start to consider like every monster, every stat block here, like it says, need a fiery phoenix, make a giant eagle or a rock, give it immunity to fire, allow it to deal fire damage with its attacks. Like, bam, start taking stat blocks and ripping them apart and seeing what you can play with, what you can't. The more you start to understand the rules and the numbers, the more you start to understand what you can break and or really bend without breaking the game. What points you can really switch out to highlight other features or to just spice something up, right? Like an encounter with goblins base stats is very different if all those goblins have flaming scimitars. So that changes up the math of the combat completely. So
Mhm.
this is the whole creating answer stat block session. You'll see online, honestly, I've probably spent way too much time on Reddit too, where like through all these numbers, where there are many creatures who you can calculate what their challenge rating should be, and this whole thing literally tells you how to do so. There's a defensive challenge rating versus an offensive challenge rating, and a lot of that incorporates looking at like, okay, if it has this many hit points, 220, it's probably around the range for CR10. Now all these numbers can be tweaked and adjusted here, but it still gives you a good idea of like, okay, here's around the area, the amount of numbers that these creatures should be having for when you're creating custom monsters. But things can change when you start to understand like things like the action economy. Start to understand more things like the environment and setting up scenarios and situations that can turn the situation to deadly. If you have a creature who has an ability where they are invisible in the darkness, and your players are all running around in with dark vision, um, then that effectively is a creature who's always invisible, so who will always have advantages on their attacks, who won't get hit, who will have disadvantage against attacks against them, can't be targeted by spells. So that one trait switch racks up that difficulty up a ton.
Mhm.
So reviewing this chart here and kind of getting a sense, but also comparing it to the monsters in the monster manual, seeing their defensive challenge rating, which is like it says, reading down the hit points, looking at the notes here, because there's also things that'll adjust uh, and modify things like special traits. Here we go. So this whole list here will go through examples of things that are effectively changes to their stats. So if we were to have the ambusher trait, which a doppelganger has, the first round of combat has advantage on attack rolls against any creature it's surprised. Keeping in mind that these creatures can read thoughts, they also have high deception, they can shape change. These creatures are ambushers, so they're typically the kind of creatures who would have surprise. So again, this tells you informs you how these creatures engage in combat. So that effectively is the same as increasing the monster's effective attack bonus by 1. So that tells you what that kind of does for the combat. And you start to see how changing all these little attributes can just add new effects, right? Like this doubles the monster's effective hit points. So damage transfer, which is what the cloaker does, where if it's wrapped around you and you hit it, it takes half damage and deals half damage to the enemy. So that whole thing is like is effectively doubling the monster's hit points because it has essentially resistance, right? When it can do that. So any ability that allows healing, you have to consider, like, if every turn they can heal, and this combat's likely to last 3 turns, then they're probably going to heal X amount times 3. That's how much is actually being added to their hit points. So whatever you think their hit point total is, that gets added even more. Then again, back to what we talked about at the beginning, adding logistics in. A creature who knows that they can just walk away and heal is going to run away, heal, and come back. That's likely a guerrilla tactics type creature. So if it can do so, once it starts looking like, okay, I've worn them down a little bit, I'm gonna get away. Now you have to consider that that creature's hit points are much, much higher total than what you might have considered for the encounter. Oh yeah.
I love it. You basically just described why Pellix is so terrifying. Because he's smart enough to know, hey, I can do this and then just go away.
Yeah, exactly. But looking at these charts and things here, like I said, it'll start to give you a better sense of what abilities are out there, because you might create creatures you might not even ever consider, like, oh man, what if I gave this creature slippery? What does that do? They have advantage to escape grapple. Okay, cool. What if I want to make a little creature here, and I think it's a slippery, slimy creature? I'm gonna give them that ability, slippery. And little things like that that can add flavor as well. Like I said before, D&D is a mechanics heavy game, and so you want the mechanics to reinforce the story that you're telling, and you want these creatures to have abilities and to have things that reinforce their role in the world, in the environment, in the ecosystem, and that help to put into the player's ideas, oh, these creatures are like this. It's why I often have so many counters that are where you'll have different, they'll have mainly like the same type of creatures, because those type of creatures tend to hang out together, like if you're
Gotcha.
hanging around, aberrations, they're not typically hanging out around beasts, so then considering, like, well, what if I made an elephant, and it had the parry ability because its tusks, this is like an experienced war elephant, and it's like, bam, new monster type right there. So yeah. And as always, thank you for watching, for listening, and for coming along. I'll see you in the next one.